Elon Musk recently gave his strongest argument about the moon landing debate and whether it was real or fake, and I have been replaying what he said because for once he paid less attention to the footage itself and more to the silence that came afterward. He wasn't just batting away rumors, he was asking the nagging question that I keep hearing in my comments. Why did humanity manage to pull off one of the most extraordinary technological achievements ever, only to later act as if we had forgotten how it was done? So I've been going back through the claims with my editor breathing down my neck. The lost tapes, the relay broadcast of Armstrong's first step, and the uncomfortable we can't replicate Apollo soundbites from NASA that fueled doubt. I get it. The Apollo program was a sprint built on Cold War urgency. Tens of thousands of engineers, vast budgets, a Saturn V that shook Florida, and a timeline that would terrify any modern program manager. But if the finish line was 1969, why does the path back feel so foggy? So during Elon Musk's interview with the Babylon Bee, the host shifted the discussion toward a persistent swirl of rumors, whether the moon landing was real or staged. He didn't mince words. He waved off the hoax idea and leaned on the obvious external check. Competitors like the Soviet Union were listening, tracking, and more than ready to pounce on any fraud. He has made versions of that case online too. And in the global tracking networks then and the internationally verified lunar activity now, and you see why his confidence resonates with a lot of people. And the historical record backs that attitude up. During Apollo, worldwide radio observatories, including those in allied and rival nations, were following every beep. Even before Apollo 11, Apollo 8 looped the moon in 1968 and sent back that famous Earthrise photograph and the Christmas Eve Genesis reading to a global audience. A moment so wildly witnessed it would have been impossible to fake in isolation without the world's astronomers noticing some anomalies. So what actually supports that belief? Considering Musk, who has built his reputation on deep knowledge of space exploration, remains convinced that the 1969 moon landing was genuine. The question becomes, what proof actually supports the certainty behind his stance? Start with the basics. Apollo 11 was a real mission with real people. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked while Michael Collins orbited in the command module. The timeline is specific. July 20th, 1969, Tranquility Base was a landing so tight Armstrong had to steer past a boulder field. The Apollo program itself wasn't a one-off performance. 6 missions landed. 12 astronauts did field geology, and they brought back 382 kilograms of rock and soil. On the tech side, Artemis and commercial landers are today's efforts, but they sit on the shoulders of Saturn V-era systems, avionics, docking, re-entry, deep space comms that were all hammered out when vacuum tubes still haunted some racks. So when people say we can't replicate Apollo, what they mean is the manufacturing chain is gone. Specialized tooling scrapped, documentation dispersed. That's bureaucracy, not a smoking gun. A common claim from deniers is that the stars should appear in Apollo photographs and that their absence is taken as proof of a hoax. Conspiracy theorists often argue the missions were staged because the skies in those photos show no stars at all. They argue ignoring the brutal glare of sunlight on the lunar surface. This trope lives on message boards, but the optics are simple. Bright foreground, short exposure, small aperture, no stars. Photographers do this on Earth all the time. You blow out the night sky if you're exposing for a lit subject. On the moon, the sunlit regolith is blinding. You don't get pinprick starlight unless you deliberately dial for it, and the astronauts weren't composing astrophotography, they were documenting rocks and hardware. Here is where optics and broadcast tech matter. Apollo's live pictures weren't a pristine direct stream. Cameras transmitted a slow scan format that had to be converted on the ground, bleeding quality. In fact, even the famous moment when Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon wasn't what viewers think of as a direct feed. It was first projected onto a screen at NASA and then refilmed for broadcast, which further explains why the footage looks degraded. The Apollo TV camera was a marvel, but a compromise. a Westinghouse unit sending 320-line 10 frames per second slow scan television. Ground stations like Honeysuckle Creek, Goldstone, and Parks received it, then a scan converter displayed it on a monitor and a standard camera filmed that, pushing it to the TV networks. The exposure settings needed to capture sunlit suits and terrain crushed faint background points. For the first step itself, the signal went through ground stations and conversion gear before it reached home TVs. It was a relay path, not a fiber-clean pipeline. And about those infamous tapes. The raw, slow-scan tapes weren't archived like gold, they were treated like routine media, and by NASA's own accounting, likely overwritten on archival failure, not a conspiracy masterstroke. Annoying? Yes. Proof of a set? No. As a reporter, I hate that, because it muddies waters that should be crystal clear, but it fits what archivists say about 1960s media practices. And this is the bigger picture. True lunar science requires real presence in samples, not studio tricks. Apollo cores preserved layered histories of micrometeorite impacts and solar wind implantation. Isotopes in the rocks locked in the moon's volcanic timeline. Independent labs around the world studied them for decades. If you'd staged it, you'd have to conjure trace gases, nanophase iron, and radiation damage that lined up with deep space exposure. The reality that two nations, decades apart, brought back lunar samples showing the same patterns of solar exposure, volcanic history, and volatile elements strongly strengthens the case for the moon landing's authenticity. Separate labs, separate politics, matching fingerprints. Pair that with laser retroreflectors left by Apollo 11, 14, and 15 still being pinged by observatories to measure the Earth-Moon distance, an ongoing, boring, measurable reality. So let's deal with the famous flag. To some eyes, the fabric seems to wave, as if a breeze were pushing it. The hardware had a horizontal crossbar to keep the flag extended. The ripples came from the crew twisting the pole into the stubborn regolith. In a vacuum, with no atmosphere to dampen motion, the fabric kept oscillating briefly before settling. That is what a true vacuum does. No air, no gusts, nothing to smooth the motion. And the fingerprints that look too crisp, dry, jagged lunar grains interlock like tiny Velcro, no water to round them off. They hold shape because nothing washes them away. In the same vein, surface behavior matches expectations from low gravity and airless physics. Particles arc and fall on clean trajectories, no billowing plumes, dust staying close to the ground. Look at testbed simulations and later robotic lander footage. The dust hugs the surface, then settles. No clouds, no hang time like you get in air. That is the physics a soundstage cannot fake. You can simulate low G with wires, but you can't fake dust dynamics obeying vacuum and 1/6 gravity across every frame and footprint. So, where does that leave the lost technology refrain? The Apollo program's turbines, valves, and checklists were 1960s solutions to 1960s constraints. You don't drag a Saturn V factory through 5 decades of budget cycles. You rebuild with new parts, new suppliers, and yes, new problems. Now that is frustrating if you want a simple answer, but it is honest. And those conspiracy claims that you've heard, no stars, weird shadows, the flag, radiation, have been unpacked again and again by engineers, photographers, and even skeptical TV shows. So if you're still wrestling with the same questions that I am, the next steps are clear. Follow the signal path of that first step all the way from a slow scan tube on the moon to a scan converter humming in a lab, read the mission logs, listen to the interagency tracking reports, and accept that sometimes the simplest explanation is messy logistics, not malice. The Apollo era was not perfect. Archives were mishandled, budgets swung, factories closed, but the arc from Apollo 8's first glimpse of Earthrise to Apollo 11's dusty boot prints to Apollo 13's controlled scramble is intact, visible, and cross-checked. And that is why when Musk shrugs at the hoax idea and points to rivals who were listening in real time, it doesn't feel like hand-waving. It feels like the way you'd audit any grand claim.